Welcome to Soul Searching, the Soul Recruitment Podcast, where we tackle all sorts of great topics in the areas of recruitment, job searching, mindset, technology, marketing, culture, and lots more. It's amazing what you'll pick up. Thanks for joining me. Well, welcome back, everyone. Darren Saul here, your host of Soul Searching, the Soul Recruitment Podcast. It's episode 49, and I have the lovely Ellie Megraw. How are you, Ellie?
Yeah, good, thanks. How are you?
Very well. Thank you so much for joining me.
You're
And today, everybody, we've got a fantastic topic. I've been following Ellie for a while, and I'm a huge fan of her work. But today, we're going to be talking about the mechanics of decision-making. Gain an insider view of your mind's processes to make decisions easier. So Ellie is an international trainer and consultant with over 15 years in training, coaching, recruitment, communication, sales, and management. She's a student of human behavior, a self-professed people geek with a certificate in psychology, a trainer of NLP, and a language and behavior consultant. Ellie will share easy-to-implement strategies that will allow you, your business, and your team to thrive. So welcome again, Ellie.
Wow, I'm like, oh, that sounds so good.
Love it. So good.
Oh, you hear someone else say it.
It's always nice when it's being read by somebody else. Just sit back and say,
oh, wow. Oh, I've done quite a lot, haven't I?
I mean, and let's chat about that. You have done quite a lot. I mean, you've done, I've been following you for ages. You've been in recruitment, you've been in training, you've been in all sorts of things. So maybe tell us a bit about your story and why you love all this so much.
Where to start? Well, my career actually started in a chicken factory many moons ago. Because it was like a place where I could work at the weekend. I got considerably more money than a lot of my peers working in a chicken factory. It was cooked already. There was no plucking or stuffing.
I'm stopping recruitment. I'm going to work in the chicken factory.
But I think it was kind of like that. I quickly progressed into management roles, and then I was supervising, and then I'd been there for like 7 years by the time I'd finished studying, and I had finished up as a trainer in that. So I was teaching people processes, doing inductions, all that kind of stuff. And I was really good at it. I really enjoyed it. But then I went to university, and it was kind of like, well, what do you do? I don't know. So I picked a business and computing degree, right? Because I was like, there's always going to be business, and computers is a big thing. That was like back when 2000s, show my age here. And I was like, well, if I know computers and I know business, I'll put myself in a good spot, right? But here's the kind of, we're talking about decision making. I didn't really give myself the opportunity to explore all the things that potentially would have been really interesting for me. In that I didn't know how to gather more information. I wasn't sure of the processes that were happening that were limiting my ability to make the best possible choice for me.
Okay.
Right. So I went to university, did my degree, came out of university, and I was like, what now? Right. So like many of us, I'd been, told what to do next all the way through. And then I get to this point where now it's my choice. And I had no clue what to do. Yeah. So I kind of spent the next probably 18 months floating around, trying little things, probably drinking too much, partying too hard because I didn't have a job, so that's fine. I only worked at the weekends. As
you do when you're young.
As you do when well, I guess I was 22, 23 at this point, so I wasn't probably as young as I was. And then I started doing a sales role, which I was selling automatic gate openers.
Yeah. Wow.
And I hated it. I felt like a complete, and I have to tell you this, like the whole way through my entire sales career, I felt like a huge fraud. I've had that, where that internal dialogue, all the the internal processes were continually beating me down. And I think it was because in the sales environment, that internal dialogue was amplified, right? So every single day, every minute, when I got to recruitment in London, it was like overdrive.
Wow.
Because it was like 120 salespeople, targets everywhere, everyone's on the phone, you're competing with each other,
Yep.
camaraderie. But every day I'd go in and I'd be like, what am I doing? I can't do this. Like, I don't want to do the cold calling. I'm not good at that.
Yep.
And doing all the things that we're meant to do that's sneaky in recruitment.
Yep.
I was like, it wasn't congruent to me and who I was. So I never felt like I could do it properly because I wouldn't do it because it didn't feel good and I felt really fraudulent
Sure.
doing the things that you had to do. And that kind of, because it was so bad inside there, and I was doing some really poor behaviors, trying to numb that dialogue. I got to the point where I was like, why am I doing this? Like, I would have my friends were all hugely successful, which pissed me off, right? So my friends were all like, $1 million billers. Even though I was giving myself a hard time, I was still kind of top middle, right? Yeah, so that kind of started me on this like, what is actually happening in there? Why are they being so successful? Yeah, I'm down here feeling really average and often quite defeatist.
Yep.
And there's so much anger and negative chat happening in here that I have to deal with every day, which obviously was quite draining emotionally and
Wow.
really stressful, right? I didn't know that this is what was happening at the time. This is my, hindsight bias
Yeah.
kicking in, observing these things as they were happening. But I think because it was so bad and I was doing something that was challenging me so much every day that it forced me to look at it. Like it forced me to try and find ways through it.
Mhm.
And that kind of started me on this journey of trying to understand who I am and why I do what I do and how do I get better? How do I create this life that I want in spite of what's happening inside my mind?
Right.
So I moved to Australia in 2010. And I'd been training and studying psychology after doing a world travel extravaganza. And when I got this opportunity, which was amazing. They paid for my flight, they paid for my visa. They wanted to start a new initiative in their business. What they were finding was that they were hiring experienced consultants who were coming into the business, and more times than not, they weren't working out,
Mhm.
or they weren't doing things the way that they wanted them to do them in terms of how that brand worked.
Yep.
So my job then was to create the program, hire the rookies, manage them, and then put them out on the sales floor. I was like, amazing, this is my perfect job. I love this. But then again, I kind of get into this challenge position where most of the time I wanted to sack my team.
Ah,
It's like, why aren't they learning this? This is so easy, because for me it was A, B,
yep.
C, D, E, da, da, da. Yet these people who I was training who had limited to no experience, I was just like, ugh, right. And there was a lot of stuff happening there from an ego perspective and a pressure perspective because this was a new initiative, it was a change
Mhm.
program in the business. And my boss had to come in and try and pull me off the wall constantly. Like,
Wow.
I'm like, why isn't this working? Blah, blah, blah. Again, that pushed me into the neuro linguistic programming field
Mhm. Yeah.
because it's a great way to understand how others think. So
Yeah.
you're understanding how you think, how you process information, what are the connections and things that are happening based on the beliefs, so that you can put yourself into that other person's perspective and give them information in a way that helps them understand.
Yep.
But little did I know through that process, I was learning so much more about me and breaking down a lot of barriers about who I thought I was and what I thought I was capable of. Um, and then kind of natural progression, I was like, okay, the language and behavioral part of it was really good for recruitment in that you understand how people get motivated, how people make decisions, and how people process information based on how they speak.
Yep.
Right? And when we are hiring someone, understanding, like, obviously you want to understand how they get motivated, how they process information, how they make decisions, but often we don't have ways to tell how a person's doing that.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, we just like, oh, well, yeah, I think that they've
We
done it in
might
the
ask some. We
past.
might ask some behavioural questions, but it really doesn't give us enough information.
No, because you're not, they're giving you information that they think you want to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when you understand this part of the mechanics, and it's good to understand these mechanics for yourself, in that if you process information in a certain way, and this is partly the sales stuff as well, like understanding, do I have the natural competency in terms of how my mind naturally processes information?
Mm-hmm.
Does that fit with this role? Does
Yeah.
that fit with this company? And understanding that has really kind of opened up a lot. And so when I am working either with a coaching client, someone individually, or if I'm working with a client to help them decide who's the right person for their organization, um, knowing what are the mental processes that make success in that role, because they are going to continually be making decisions on your behalf. They're going to be making decisions on how they present your company, how they grow their team, how they grow their position, how they
Yeah.
deal with their day. Is if that process doesn't suit what's available, then that person is never going to be successful.
Yeah. I agree.
So you end up having someone who'll leave the company, retention gets low, they'll maybe depend on how long you let them stay. Often people don't correct that mishire quick enough.
Yep.
That person gets downhearted, demotivated, might bring the rest of the team with it. It kind of ends up being this whole thing. Whereas, in my perspective, it's like if you have a set of things that you look for, and it's often how someone speaks as opposed to what they actually say,
Mm.
that lets you know whether or not it's going to be a natural fit. Or if you think they're going to be a fit, how they give you the information will influence how you manage them and
Love
how
it.
you
Yeah.
lead them.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of similar to what you mentioned in your own journey initially, is that you were, you felt it just wasn't authentic to you. It wasn't what you wanted to do. And you were trying to find all these other ways around things
Yeah,
because it just wasn't sitting with you.
yeah. And I thought, changing jobs would make it would make it go away.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it didn't.
Mm.
Again, it was like I had that limited um perspective on how to make a good decision. How, like what were the things that were driving me, and then how can I critique what I'm looking at in a way that's going to actually naturally fit the way that I work.
Yeah.
So it's been an interesting journey, and even in this like this entrepreneurship journey,
Mhm.
that has also been quite. There's still things that show up there, and now it's like it's not that I can find whatever way I want to work. It's like actually I need to uncover why I'm making these decisions,
Yep.
why they're influencing stuff so much, because they're impacting on how other things are actually happening.
Definitely. So much self-analysis involved. So it's almost like you can NLP yourself as well at the same time.
Yeah, oh, totally. If anyone ever has the opportunity to go and learn NLP, I think it should be like a baseline um,
Wow.
thing. It should be taught in schools, because the ability for you to know yourself and to know others and to regulate yourself emotionally, because often your thoughts and your feelings are fake, right?
Mhm.
Because they're based on a perception that we have of ourselves, which is often not true,
Yeah.
or a perception of a situation, um, which again influences that decision, right? It's like, okay, well, where am I? There's a big thing called confirmation bias,
Mhm.
if you've heard of it.
No.
So it's a cognitive bias that we have, and we continually search out information that backs up what we think,
Yeah.
right?
I have.
So
I have heard of it.
yeah, you have heard of it.
Yeah.
So we will discount
Yeah.
all the other information unless it backs up exactly what we believe to be true.
Yeah.
And it's often these beliefs that are governed by these biases um, that can drive misinformed decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like, if you're trying to get out of recruitment, for example, it's kind of taken me a few steps, and I'm not fully out of it. Like,
Yep.
it still kind of has me.
Yeah.
But in those initial stages, why I kept jumping from job to job was because I had this belief that no one would pay me to do something else.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's the thing.
And
As soon as you have an initial belief, it could be false, but it's easier to keep finding information that confirms it rather than to
exactly,
start from the beginning, because it's too mentally and physically
yeah,
and emotionally draining.
exactly. People don't like it. It's so uncomfortable. That's why people don't want to do
Yeah.
change,
Yeah.
and it takes things to be super bad
Yeah.
in order for the catalyst, because we're naturally programmed, we're naturally designed for the easy road.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, everything about us is about pushing stuff that's hard, making it easy, and then pushing it into the unconscious
Yep.
and making it the least amount of friction possible. So when we're in these positions where, my great aunt walked around with a broken hip for 10 years.
Whoa, no way.
Yeah.
Oh my
So
God.
yeah. So she was like, literally, she wore it down so much to the
Oh,
point where it got so bad she had to get a hip replacement, right? And like for me, when I think about that, it's like she was in pain for 10 years, but the pain was never bad enough
oh my
for
God.
her to do anything about it. And that's often what I see with companies and coaching clients, is that they only come to me when things are bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
They only want to change their hiring, their culture, their whatever, when it's not working, when they're hemorrhaging staff,
Yeah.
when relationships are breaking down, all those kind of things. And it's like, okay. But again, the catalyst, the decision, means then we're not looking for the information that gives us the confirmation. We then start to look for that conflict and start to look for solution, because that information isn't being backed up anymore.
That's right. Wow. My God. These days, in this society that we live in, everything around us is built for convenience. It's built for comfort. You know,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Uber,
Yep.
home delivery, everything.
Yep.
Everything makes life easy. So we're not used to doing the hard stuff.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's kind of, laziness is the author of invention,
Mm.
in that because we're continually looking and learning, and we get shots of dopamine and serotonin every time we learn something new.
Yep.
So our chemistry is continually pushing us to evolve
Yeah.
and to do things quicker, better, faster, because our unconscious mind wants to take as much of that responsibility as possible, because the conscious mind can only handle 7 ± 2 bits of information at any one time.
Wow. Oh, good.
Yeah. So when we're getting 2 million bits of information, we can handle 134 bits, but the conscious mind can only handle 7.
That's
We
that's
have,
impressive in itself. I thought 7 is quite a bit.
yeah,
7.
it's kind of like 2 million to 7.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a lot of internal mental processes that are happening to make that information gather fish efficient.
Yeah. Wow. It's crazy.
Yes, it is crazy. But often we can get the processes which maybe worked for us at one point in time. If things aren't necessarily going the way that we want them to, it's because the beliefs that we have and the processes that we have that worked back then don't work now, and they need an update.
Yep. Definitely. I've heard a lot of people say very similar things. They said, the operating system that we once used needs to be upgraded sometimes.
Yeah. It's the operating system, but the hardware never changes,
Yeah.
right? So it's kind of making sure that the operating system is optimal based on the hardware.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Wow.
interesting. Yeah.
I mean, and in terms of decision making itself, I mean,
Yeah.
do you think that in this day and age, decision making is harder and harder. Like I'm finding there's more choice, there's more information, there's less time.
Yep.
It just seems like making any decision, I just rather people make the decision for me. Or can you make it really easy? Give me 2 options, not 500.
Yeah.
I don't know if you,
Yeah, and it is. It's kind of like we've moved into this information age, which, we get, I should have found the stat, but it was something like, the equivalent like 100 years ago was like two pages of a newspaper, whereas we get like millions and millions of bits of information
it's incredible. From a million different places all at the same time.
from a million different places all at the same time. However, I feel like where people are going wrong in the places in that where they are feeling overwhelmed by those decisions, where doubt it starts to creep in after the people have made the decision. Like we make 35,000 decisions a day.
Wow. Huh.
Yeah, 35,000.
Crazy.
Like that's kind of where you get the likes of Steve Jobs, right? He just wore the same thing because he was getting
That's right.
decision fatigue. So he was like, I'm just going to have the same thing and I'm just going to wear the same thing. So I
That's
don't
right.
have to think about it.
Yep.
That's where, the likes of the Hello Fresh and people like that are like, not only is it from a convenience perspective that it's delivered to the house, but there's also that decision of, wait, what am I eating? What am I making?
Yeah. Yeah. Just keep
That
it simple.
takes that out. Like you said, I just want someone to make the decision for me.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, that's gone then.
Agree. Yeah. Or grab an Uber. I don't have to think
Yeah,
about which
don't have
route.
to.
I don't have to
No,
think about anything. Just let me do what I got to do and just get me there. I don't care.
exactly.
Right.
But I think the issue is that often people don't know where they're going. So when I ask people, what do you want? They'll give me a whole list of things about what they don't want.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I don't want to make this decision. I don't want to have to choose, right? And we've just had that conversation. Whereas, you said things like, I want it to be easy. And it's kind of like people confuse the not.
Yeah.
So one of the things in NLP, the very first things that you learn in NLP is that the unconscious mind cannot process negatives directly. So if I was to say to you, don't think of a blue elephant,
Right.
did you just think of a blue elephant?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So in order to not think of a blue elephant, you have to think of a blue elephant.
Right.
Right. So when we're telling ourselves like we don't want to be confused, we're basically saying, hey, be confused.
Be confused. Yep.
And the unconscious mind is brilliant at making this stuff happen.
Yeah.
But we have to be very conscious about the stuff that we put in, right? The input that we put in.
Yeah.
But when we're not clear on what the goal is, and you had this conversation before we got on about like where I'm kind of at the moment when trying to decide, it's a because I'm kind of focusing a little bit on the what stuff that I don't want, right? Because that's what I said. I'm like, I'm looking at the parts of my business that I like, the parts that I want to keep, and the parts that I want to go in order to get clear on what the goal is and what the vision is. And then when I have that, I can then go. You know that analogy of you can't put if you've got the GPS, like it's no good you getting into an Uber if you don't know where you're going. Because they don't know how to work out the route and all that kind of stuff.
Right. That's right.
So I think that's one of the issues with decision making is people don't really know what the goal is. They don't know what are the biases and what are the beliefs that are influencing the information gathered that they do have.
Yeah.
So like understanding, right, for me, one of the processes in the language and behavior profile is that people can look for options, right? So they like to have like to have a few options of what they can do, or they might be process. They like to do the step.
Yep.
In my business, I'm very options, right? Which is brilliant if you're an artist, right? Because you get really creative, you come up with ideas. If you're an ideas entrepreneur and you're able to, what you'd be very good at is looking at alternatives. So being able to put lots of things together that maybe you would never have thought to put together. But the trouble with that is that if you are very options orientated and you don't have the capacity to get into process, you never deliver anything.
100%. Very great. You need to have both,
Exactly. Well, it depends, right? Because this is all very contextual.
Yep.
So the mental processes that you would use to choose your dinner would probably be different to the mental processes that you choose when you're trying to interview a candidate, right?
True.
Or trying to get a client on board. So the processes that you have are very contextual. This is one of the reasons I have issues with psychometric testing,
Mm-hmm.
because it's like, here's your box and you
Yeah,
can go into it, and it's like, oh well, I might be that on that day, but I might be completely, because I slide on that introvert extrovert scale
that's right.
depending on the time of the day or what's happening
And
in my
also
life.
depending on which role you're playing in life, is very
Exactly.
different.
Yeah, well, which parts of myself I choose to show up at
Yep.
that point.
Exactly.
And it also means that people have to be really objective about who they are and what they're capable of, and we're not. We're
No.
really not objective about that sorts of
Yeah.
things. So I think in terms of the data collect in the personality test, it's not. It's open to too much bias, and therefore I don't like it. That's why I lean more to the language and behavior, because it's contextual. So it's like we talk about it in terms of work, we talk about it in terms of play, and we figure out like what is it in each of them. Um, and people talk it
Yeah,
like
that's
they
right.
and
It's almost
they
subconscious. You
yeah
can't force it. You can't
yeah
fabricate it because it's
no
subconscious. It's showing up
exactly.
subconsciously, and it
And
can be
most of
really.
the time, yeah, we don't realize. Um, if you ever have a chance to look at Noam Chomsky, he's a
Oh, I have
famous
heard of
linguistic researcher, and the language and behavior profile stuff is kind of based off that in combination with what NLP calls meta programs.
it.
So they're the programs that manage the programs, like
The stuff underneath.
yeah. And I think there's something like 56 of these meta programs, but language and behavior profile pull them down to 14. So they're the processes that actually influence the processes that we have. But they match that then with Noam Chomsky's work from the linguistics perspective. And what he found is that we have it's called transformational grammar. And we give over these syntax errors when we speak that influences, that tells the person who we're speaking to how we are experiencing things or how we have experienced things in the past. And when you understand these syntax errors, you can then understand, right, that person, like if I said to you, how do you make your podcast? Right.
Yep.
And you started telling me about all the different things that you considered about podcasts and what other mediums you could have used and all that kind of stuff. You're not answering my question,
No.
right? Where we talked before about options and procedures. When someone asks you how, that's a grammatical indication that I want you to give me the steps.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Yep.
So there's all these like really beautiful things that once we become aware of, then we can kind of go, oh, all right, that's the blind side. This is the bit that I need to look at in terms of conflict.
Gotcha.
So
And
that
so
confirmation bias and then the conflict, there's the missing part.
that's fair. And so if someone answered that question in terms of not giving you the how, but just gave you all the the details,
Mm.
what do you deduce from that?
Well, I would deduce that person's a very option oriented person.
Mm-hmm.
So if I was talking back to them, I would then be talking in options.
Gotcha.
But if I was a leader and someone come up to me and said, how do I do that? I would then have to go to them. I think that's one of the things about being a very powerful communicator is that you have to go to where that person is. There's no, if they're, over there feeling lost and confused, and you're like, come over here. I've got all the clarity and all the answers.
Mm-hmm.
There's too much of a gap between where they are and where you are
Yep.
to get them to that. So then being able to go, okay, like I know that you're confused, and here's some of the steps that we can take to get you there.
Love it.
Right?
You have to be really careful in how you're interpreting what they're asking. And if they're asking how, you better give them how and not what.
Yeah. Yeah. Because if I was to answer that, that means I'm using my model of the world.
Mm.
in that, I love options. And I was like, yeah, how do we get a podcast? Well, I kind of looked at this and this and this and this and this, and this is the, and this is da, 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 da. I'm just confusing them.
That's right. They didn't ask that question. Yeah.
That's not what they wanted. They wanted me to tell them the step by step on how to create a podcast.
Gotcha.
Right.
Love it.
If I was to ask you, why did you choose a podcast, and you give me options, that's different.
Different game. Yep.
Yeah. So it's kind of like when we start to ask ourselves these questions, why do I do that? How do I make that decision? How do I make that? It's kind of then we start to open up our decision making capacity, because we start to gather more information and start to root out our biases and our beliefs to actually find truth, as opposed to the assumptions that we make based on our past experiences.
Gotcha. Wow. And then in terms of decision making, then, is it something that can be easily broken down into what are the general steps, or what's the flow chart for us human beings?
Oh, wow.
How to
I
make
have
decisions,
that.
or not really?
Well, I have. So, obviously I have my experience, and I've read a lot about decision making. I got guided to create a workshop on the art of quick decision making.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, I need to do some research into this, because I kind of knew what I knew, and I was like, okay, well, how does the rest of the world perceive it? And I'm quite good at spotting patterns and how things kind of overlap. So I kind of pulled all this research and pulled all this information and pulled the NLP in and layered it on top and created a bit of a flow chart in terms of it's about having the goal, right? Ultimately, if you don't have the goal, then the decision is always going to be flawed, right? And making sure that goal is really the goal that you want. Then in terms of that goal, having the criteria of how you know when that goal has been achieved. So I know that I'm a successful entrepreneur when, I can take 3 weeks off in the summer. I can, there's constantly money coming into the bank, right? So there's all the evidence that is going to tell you that the goal has been achieved. And then we kind of move into, and if anyone wants to get a copy of this, they can go to my website and they can get the training. So they have the goal, they have their criteria, and then they have to look at options, right? So the difference between decision and choice is important for us to understand when we're making those decisions. So the choice is like the act of choosing a particular path, but decision it actually comes from the word to decipher, right, which means to cut off in Latin. So when we're choosing and when we have to make a decision, the decision part is when we're sort of evaluating lots of different options and we're saying yes to one particular path. And when we say yes to one particular path, we're saying no to
we cut off all the rest.
Cut off all the other ends. But then the choice is then actually picking that and taking steps in order to action out that.
Okay. Is delivering on that decision.
Yeah. So it's actually that, here's the decision, here's the cutting off, and then that choice is like, right, I'm actually going to go and do that. One of the most interesting things I heard about choice is like, you have to be willing to let it all go. And once because often when we're so sort of tight to expectation and have tos and should do's, we actually don't have a choice.
And that's where a lot of that confirmation bias comes in as well, and all that other stuff.
Yeah, people are like, it's like, well, I have to be in my relationship. Well, because we have a house and a child and all this kind of stuff. It's like, okay, well, that have to implies that there is no choice.
Yeah.
Again, we talk about the transformational grammar and people, I should and I have to and all those kind of things. It's like, okay, well, are you prepared to let it all go? Because that's when you actually have choice.
That's when you have free choice, when you are really, you have every option and that is potentially feasible.
Yeah. And then when you pick your partner and you pick your child and you pick your house, it's a free choice and it's something that you've wholeheartedly gone into rather than being forced to. The decision then is yours because you've opened up the possibilities And then the choice has been to move forward wholeheartedly.
And you'll probably be much happier with that decision as well because you've done it in that way.
Yeah, you gathered all the information. So this is the step two is the options, right? So what are all the other things that you can actually do to create that goal? So I was having a chat with a mum recently, and her son's teenage boys. They've got money. Um, One of their friends wanted them to invest in um, a business.
Mhm.
uh, they wanted quite a lot of money for some old stock, and there wasn't really a lot of stuff available. But the boys were really excited, and they really wanted to do it, right? And they were like, "Yeah, let's just 10 grand, here you go."
Yeah.
And I talked her through this process, right? And but one of the things that I was like, okay, it's not just the right. So they're like, we're gonna put this 10K in there, and we want to make money. That was the goal. They then had to understand, like, right, what else could I do with that 10K and still get money back?
Mhm.
So how else could I invest that money?
Yeah, that's right. Love it.
And I started them to think about, right, investing in, managed funds and things like
Yeah,
that, where you, that 10K and you wouldn't have to do anything for
yeah,
it.
absolutely. Wow.
So yeah, so it's kind of like, right, they're like, invest. I want to start a business. And it's like, okay, when we actually pull it back and go, right, what are the other options that are available for that money to still get me the same outcome and the same goal?
Love it.
That this is what I was saying at the beginning, where I was like, I really wish I knew this stuff, because I probably wouldn't have done business and computing. I probably would have done something like psychology. Like, I had a very good friend of mine. He was doing psychology the whole time, and I had no clue that that's what he was doing. And I was like, why didn't you tell me psychology was so interesting? And he said, you were so busy with Java and Prolog, you had no clue. And I was like, oh yeah, okay. Um,
Wow, I like that.
yeah.
So
So
it's
it's kind of,
so it's really about understanding first of all where you want to go,
yep,
why you want to get there,
yep.
and then
The
really,
measurements.
sorry,
So it's where you want to go, why you want to get there, the measurements.
the
So
measurements,
how
the
how are you going
indicators.
to
Yep,
know
love
you've
it,
achieved the goal, the
love it.
criteria?
And then you decide to go through the process of choice and decision making.
Yep. Well, you don't kind of get to the thing. So the next step is really about information gather.
Mm.
So this is about creating as much um, analysis as you can. So with your options, it's like looking at, where am I making assumptions? How are my values and my beliefs uh, influencing these choices, right? So it's like, if you have a value that is around money and that you can only make it by having a job,
Mhm.
they are like, the thought of investing your money in a managed fund probably would never have crossed
Yeah, that's right.
the mind, because it's like, well, you only make money by working,
That's right. Yep.
right? Then looking at the opportunities and the threats. So it's like, what could influence this decision, right? Or influence the options that are coming out. So for the business that they wanted to buy was an entertainment business. And it was like, well, what are the opportunities and threats for that business?
Yep.
And then what are the opportunities and threats for the managed fund? What are the opportunities and threats on starting an online business? What are the opportunities and threats of, like, they're really into fashion? Like, so why don't you do something that you're actually really into, as
Yeah,
opposed to something that,
love it.
so, and then looking at what the potential failures. So the failures are probably the biggest thing, because a lot of time we don't want to believe that things might fail.
Mm.
But there's so much research out there that says that the people who look for the points where they might fail are about 60 to 70% more likely to achieve the goal. So
Wow.
people who are only focused on the goal and are like, I'm gonna get it,
Yep.
they most of the time actually don't achieve the goal.
Hi, guys. Just a quick message. I'm always on the lookout for engineers in the managed services space across Australia, support engineers, systems engineers, network engineers, and solution consultants. I only work with the best companies that are going places, really value their staff, have great techs, and offer stacks of training and other benefits, up to $1,000 for successful referrals. Who do you know? Feel free to give me a buzz, 0414 659 800. But right now, back to the conversation. Yep.
Because
So
they
really, you have
aren't.
to look at both sides of the coin properly and then you can, build a very, very strong plan on how you're going
Yeah.
to achieve what you're going to achieve. And
Yeah.
there's less chance of failing.
Yeah. And I think it's like that when you look at, right, what could go wrong? What are the potential failures? You then are again creating, like, gathering more information
Yep.
so that you can feed it back into your goal and your criteria, and then it opens up other things. So in that research, you might find that could be a potential failure, but actually there's a whole other opportunity here that I've never seen and
Yeah.
I would never have considered before. So yeah, just making sure that you've kind of built out all of the options. So an NLP, choice is, when you have choice is better than no choice. So when you have one option, you feel backed into a corner, right?
Uh-huh.
When you have two, you're in a dilemma because then you're
Yep.
like, well, which one do I choose? But when you've got three things to choose from, you then have a choice, right?
Wow.
Because you then have clarity over what are the options, where can I go, what's the path.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then you go through the process, right? So you've gone through all your stuff and you're like, okay, well, who do I need to get involved? When does it need to happen? How is this gonna work for each of the options?
What research do I need to do?
Yeah, what else do I need to do in terms, you kind of gathered all this information.
Yep.
And then yeah, just evaluate, like, looking at, right, have I done everything that I needed to do? Have I got a good enough view on this? And then decide then, based on the information, based on the goals and the criteria, you loop back around and go, okay, which of these options is the best one to do based on what it is that I'm trying to achieve?
Nice. Yep. Love it.
And it's a kind of circular thing. It's not, it kind of, you keep coming back to it and adding and changing and moving along.
Now, I mean, a lot of this stuff can sound exhausting. There's a lot of stuff to do.
Yeah,
And there's so much more choice these days. Yeah.
yeah. And I think that's why, getting good at this and knowing how you naturally work alleviates a lot of that. So, because it feels hard now, right? So you're
Mm.
like, oh, this feels
Oh my
hard
Lord.
because it's new to you. You don't have these neural pathways created. So
Yeah.
your unconscious mind hasn't tried to get it into the unconscious to make it easy for you.
Yeah. Gotcha.
So the more you do it, the more you practice, and the more you filter your decision process through a mechanism like that one. There's lots of different tools out there. You get better at it, and your
Faster.
decision quality gets better, and the outcomes don't necessarily matter as much because often we confuse the decision with the outcome. So if the outcome was good, the decision was good. If the outcome was bad, the decision was bad.
I like that. Cool.
But it's not
Good to
always
say.
true.
That's right. And it might be a decision could have been good, but the outcome might have been something totally different, but still something really great. And it took you in
Yeah.
a direction that you weren't intending on going, but it might have been a better one.
Yeah.
So it was still a good decision in that case.
Yeah, but it's like, why do we have to label it as good or
Yeah.
bad? It's kind of like it's just what happened. Like,
Yeah.
ideally, this is what I wouldn't want to happen, but this is what happened. But I've got an opportunity to learn now from this,
Yeah.
and I can change my process, or I can think about things in a slightly different way and open up
Yeah.
other opportunities based on that learning.
Yeah.
And I think that's the important thing. We're not so attached to the outcome.
I love that. I think that's so true. Yeah.
We can then it's kind of like we get efficient because we're not so guarded on
That's
the
right.
well, the last time I did that didn't. It's like we either win or we grow. Like, it's kind
Yeah.
of, there's
I
no
like it.
this failure.
Yeah. I suppose as long as you've done your due diligence and you've really made that decision, taking in all the information that you had gathered, and you're
Yeah.
very proud of that decision, then run with it, enjoy it, and as you say, be outcome independent.
Yeah. And see it as an opportunity for growth, like an opportunity for learning. And again, even in the win situation, when it does turn out the way that you want it, using that as a, not just a, oh yeah, we got it. It's like, okay, well, like, how did that? Because there's lots of things that, when we talk about the opportunities and threats, there's so much in there that we have no control over.
Mm-hmm.
That if you know, if we put our value and our worth on our ability to make good decisions, yet most of the decisions that we're making are from outdated information that are not, it's not fully rounded, and then the outcomes aren't the ones that we want, then who we think we are and how we feel about ourselves gets very negatively
Definitely.
impacted.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of why people struggle to make decisions, because there is that fear of, if I decide wrong, then who does that make me?
That's right. Yeah. And what will everybody else say? And that feeds into your self-image and
Yeah,
confidence, and that's a whole vicious
yeah.
cycle.
But when you make good choices, everyone's like, yeah. But when you kind of go, yeah, it didn't quite work out, but
But it was
I
the
had a
right decision. It was the
solid,
right
yeah, it was
choice.
the right choice for me at the time
Yeah.
based on the information that I had.
Yeah.
And that's all you can really do is like, because once you know better, you can do better. And it's only in that action of moving through a process like this and understanding, it's like with recruitment, one of the things I used to teach my newbies is like, if you don't do all the steps in the process, you're never going to know why a deal fell over, right? You're
Yeah.
never going to know why a process worked or why a process didn't work if you don't do all the steps, because you can't then pinpoint at what point did it fall over.
Yeah. And you can't learn from that and make sure you do that next time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's very similar in that if you understand and you use the same process, and I think it's, from a company perspective, if everyone's using the similar process, you're allowing people a lot of autonomy in that they can still come up with the options, but you're just giving them a framework
Mhm.
in order to operate in a way that still gets the right outcome and it's moving people towards the goal,
Yeah.
as opposed to haphazardly, you know, get a good result, not get a good result.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
choose to go into one market and not choose to go into another, and then it all falls down. It's kind of being super clear on, yep, you can make those choices, but I want you to do this. I want you to go through this process to make sure that everything that you're doing is transparent and open, and that you're not letting your biases hold you back.
Yeah. 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 I love it. Yeah.
Hmm.
Wow. And I'd love to get even more tactical here and, kind of get into maybe a couple of tips and tricks for people when they are going through this process.
Mm-hmm.
Are there certain things that they can do? For example, like take an hour with a pad and a piece of paper, or
Yep.
really tactical things, or take a few minutes before you decide. Take a few minutes before you
Yep.
answer that question. What kind of tricks can you give us in terms of while you're on that journey in decision
Yep.
making? Some of the things that we can do from a behavioral point of view to really to put us in the right position.
Yeah. So I think getting really clear on the goal, right? So having a really clear, measurable goal. So not necessarily, the SMART goals,
Yeah. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
smart, measurable,
Yeah.
but thinking, okay, how, like, what is the thing that I'm going to have at the end? Right? What is that? And how am I going to know? So what's going to be the evidence that that's the right choice? Because I think everything kind of stems off that.
Yeah.
Everything stems, a good decision stems off a really well thought out goal.
Yeah.
And when, we're writing things like, selling more things, or being da, 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 or I want to have $1 million business, it's like, okay, well, why? Like, why is that $1 million business? Where did I get that number from?
Mm-hmm.
What would I do with that? How, like, you kind of have a lot kind of going into that, maybe that options mode in terms of the goal. It's like, right, well, if it wasn't a million, what else could it be?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And if
Absolutely.
you're doing 10K and you're like, I want to get to a million, your mind can't handle that amount of change.
Yeah.
So it can handle anywhere. I think it's from 3 to 25% change.
Uh-huh.
So it will happily accept 3 to 5% change from where you are and where you want to be. But if you do anything more than that, the unconscious mind goes, "You joker!
You're kidding.
This
Forget
is
it.
ridiculous. We can't do that. What do you mean?"
Yeah.
But when we go, like, so if we go from 10 to 20,
Yeah.
20 to 40, we start to to do those
Yeah.
with 100, like a million being the end thing. But really understanding like what's the motivation behind it. Like that's probably the big thing. It's like, well, if I get that, what does that mean?
That's right. And I suppose also, when you're doing that, it's important to think about what you're going to have to do to get there and maintain that, because that's a whole other ballgame.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And that you might want to run, like, if people want to get into this, they can go to my website and get this free training. Um, if I got that goal, like what could other goals be? Looking at the options, what are the assumptions that I'm making? Like, I read on LinkedIn, this lady is like, oh, I've just moved, I've got my dream job, yet it's with the same company. But for years I was under the assumption that I had to be in this place, in this particular location, in order for me to have this job and have the career that I want. But the company had changed and moved and obviously offered more remote working so that she could go and live and work in the place that she wanted to live in and still have the career that she wanted.
Wow, there you go.
Yeah, but it's like we kind of have these false dichotomies of what we think we can have and what we can't have. And actually when we go into that goal investigation, let's call it, um, we then start to understand the drivers and the motivations behind it that actually influence, right? Well, why do I want that? It was a really interesting exercise that a lady did, was to write down all the reasons why you wouldn't want $1 million.
Wow. Yep.
Right. I was like, what? Why I wouldn't want it? And it's a really powerful exercise to help you understand what are some of the limiting beliefs and some of the assumptions and the criteria you put on money.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, some of mine I was like, oh wow, that's really weird. Like I wouldn't know how to handle it, right? So the responsibility of having $1 million, I'm like, whoa, that's a big responsibility.
Yeah.
And so unconsciously I'm pushing that away because I'm like, it's too much. I can't handle it and it has to be dealt with properly.
Yeah.
And I was
Yeah.
like, oh, interesting, right? So just being able to uncover some of those assumptions and those values and beliefs that are behind the goal. So maybe if you put your goal out and you say, okay, why don't I want that? That might give you a bit more clarity in terms of what are some of those processes that are holding you back.
Nice. Nice. I love that. Absolutely. And it sounds like assumptions is a big one. We always hold on to these assumptions some of us throughout our lives, and
Yep.
things change, environments change, decisions change, management changes, and they're not valid anymore.
Yep.
And so if
But
you
yet
ask the question,
we have no because we believe what we believe, right? We don't really have any way to challenge those beliefs,
yeah,
which is, it's only when we start to see outcomes that we don't want that we then start to go, well, and often, like lots of people go through their whole lives with all these assumptions, like many people. I'm from Northern Ireland originally, and it's like, well, you have to do a job in order to make money.
yeah,
A job that you hate, sorry, you have to do a job that you hate in order to make money. And it's like, okay, that's a belief, it's an assumption.
yeah,
It's like, well, you can't make money in Ireland. You can't be a big wig. You can't, so there's all these like generational and
that's right.
um that have come through the DNA that
Yeah,
a lot of us don't even realize that
that's right.
we've got.
And I love. I mean, the last few years have really um,
Challenge that.
blown away a lot of those assumptions. Totally. Look at
Yeah,
how we're working. Look at how we're living. Um, Everything's changed, and
yeah,
those assumptions have been totally exposed.
yeah. And I think it's uh, I kind of delve a lot into the spiritual stuff as well because I feel like um the scientific and the spiritual world very much overlap.
Mm,
They just use different terms
that's right.
to describe what's happening.
Yep.
And I like being able to observe things from a very pragmatic, methodical way, and also from more that esoteric,
In
um,
a physical way. Yep.
yeah, it's like philosophical, like, well,
Yep.
what chair, um, that's the thing that the famous test answer. It's
Yep.
like, describe the chair, and they're like, what chair?
Yeah.
And being able to kind of challenge those, because you can only you're creating from who you are now, right? So until you can connect to who you want to be and who you
Mhm.
could be in the future, the things that you think are possible are you would probably never think are possible for you now, right? Because you're operating from who you are right now.
That's right.
And if you're making decisions from who you are right now, again, they're only based on the information that you've got right now. And I don't know if you know the work of Joe Dispenza.
No.
So he's a chiropractic doctor who had a bike accident, and he was paralyzed from the spine
Okay.
down, and he was told he would never walk again. And he was like, well, no, I don't. Yeah, I don't
I don't
take
buy
that,
that.
right?
I'm not buying
I don't
that.
buy that, and I choose not to hear you. And so he kind of went through the thing of trying to get his mind to influence his body, and he got it to repair itself. And since then, he still has his chiropractic practice, um, but he goes around the world teaching people quantum physics, and
Wow.
how what they actually realize now is that a molecule doesn't exist until we put our attention on it.
Uh-huh.
Right? So we've got all these atoms, all this material that's happening, but everything that we think is solid is actually not solid. It's all just particles vibrating. But we, until we put our attention on it, the particle doesn't exist. So the particles just keep coming in and out of existence, right?
Yep.
So they can exist anywhere in time.
Yeah.
And so the illusion of time and space actually doesn't really exist, because it's only our perception on
Yep.
it that creates it. And so for him, like, how I like to think about it is like, if I was to fold time and talk to myself in 10 years' time and see through my eyes in 10 years, what have I achieved? It's like, it's this really crazy
Pretty crazy.
experience.
Yep.
But again, then it goes back to influencing the decisions. Because if I take that person who's made all those decisions to get to there, then I start changing how I make decisions now to get to that point.
Yep. Yep. I love it. I think that's really important in that, is to leave the door open for change and for growth. So we don't have to limit ourselves to what we've achieved up to this point or who we are up
No.
to this point.
And often the
leave
things
that
that
door open.
like the things that you think are possible. I don't know if you've seen Mickey Flanagan. He's
No.
a comedian from England.
Okay.
He's very funny. He's a bit crass. He's on YouTube if you get a chance to watch him. But in one of his skits, he's like, remembering back to when he was young, and he's like, the teacher was asking, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he was like, oh, I want to drive the van that delivers all the stuff. And people are like, you dreamer, Hutton. Like, we pack the van. We don't drive the van. So it's like, we have these,
Absolutely.
we have these things. And now he's a multimillionaire. He's, a comedian. Like, um, he wasn't confined to those assumptions and those
Exactly.
beliefs of the people around him
Love it.
that drive decisions. He was open to and going through what he wanted to do in terms to achieve his goals. So it's kind of like, it's really interesting as I watch, myself and others figure out their life's path. And it's like, well, if I was to try and think about what's possible for me in 10 years time based on who I am right now, it's probably not, it's not anything that I could conceivably predict.
Yeah. And as you say, baby steps, you can change certain amount, you can conceive only certain percentage increments. So do it slowly.
Yep.
Yeah. And there's a great quote that I always think about. I forgot who said it, but it says, make decisions based upon the person you would like to become.
Yeah.
And I really love that quote because it just really makes you stop and think, hold on, let's just think about this before I just automatically do what I,
automatically do.
My automatic response would be.
Yeah. Yeah. What's that? Dress for the job you want, not the job you have.
Yeah,
The Batman.
Yeah. I love it.
I mean, yeah, it's a very, and I understand, like, is having, you know when we are doubting all the time, when we're in overwhelm, when we have too many options and not a way to critically siphon them off and
Mm,
get focused on the ones that are important, it does affect us emotionally. It does affect our ability to perform and to get the outcomes that we want. And so I think it's really important to have processes like these that help people understand what's actually happening inside there. What are the processes dictating the processes, which dictate the beliefs and the
yeah.
values, which then dictate the behavior? And thinking, okay, well, do I still want that? Is
Yeah.
that still serving me? And then what do I need to do to change it?
Yeah. I love it. And as you say, any way that you can to streamline that process, the
Mm,
better, because there are so many options, and it's overwhelming. So if you can have a
so
good
overwhelming.
process that really, and the more you perform that process, the quicker you become at executing that process,
Mm.
then all the better.
Yeah. And like, I think, to give you an example, I've used this. So basically, I help businesses come up with a decision-making process for their hiring. And I remember being in this particular interview, and I think the interview was like an hour and 10 long. And I'd gone through the whole process to help the client decide, like, what are the success metrics? How are we going to measure it? What are we looking for in the interview? And this guy, like, energy was great. We had a really good conversation, but I was going through
Yeah.
all my stuff, right? So emotionally, I was like, oh yeah, like this, like I really wanted it because I was like, oh yeah, it's really good. We're having a good chat and da 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 da. But then when I brought it back to the process and the criteria and the all the stuff, I was like, no,
It
he's not
didn't
right,
work. Yeah.
right? And the reason being was that he actually didn't say anything of much
Wow.
value. He just talked about different things to kind of muffle it.
Hmm.
Um, he he had a lot of blame and inability to take responsibility
Yep.
for things
Yep.
that have
Yep.
happened in his previous job.
Interesting.
So I said to as the client, I was like, oh, I was like, would you have hired him? And he said, yeah, probably. And I was like, no, he's not right for your business. He's not right for your brand. These are the reasons, blah blah blah. And about 2 months later, the client sent me a text and he's like, yes, he's on site. And I was like, hey, and it was the candidate who hadn't said anything really. And the client had hired them directly. And I was
Oh,
like, yeah. I was like, so his client, sorry,
oh, I see.
so my client was a contractor on site, and the who he contracted to had brought
Gotcha.
him
And
in,
they hired him.
and they hired him. And within 2 days, he'd pissed off a senior manager
Oh my
of
goodness.
the whole, like super senior, like
Wow.
really high level guy, was disappearing for hours that took jobs to do, like took 2 hours to do, he'd take six.
Wow.
Um, just a real problem candidate.
Yeah.
But it proved to me that helping in that decision making process saved that client so much money, so much heartache. Because if he'd gone on site, he'd have damaged that reputation for my client
Mm,
because they're about the high standards of delivery.
yeah.
Um, and it was just like, oh, yes, this stuff works. Because when emotion gets involved, all our biases kick in.
That's right.
We want to place it, we want to get that person to start because we're busy and we need this,
Yeah.
we need to cover the client and the expectations and all this kind of stuff. But it's like you keep coming back to the process, keep coming back to the things that are important, and make your decisions from there rather than from emotion
From
and
a
gut and
point of
things like that.
emotion. Yeah. It's so interesting. I think that's fascinating.
Mm.
Because
Yeah, it's
we all we all tend to get swept up in, you know,
mm,
charisma and emotion and having fun. And we, as you say, after 1.5 hours of analysis, you might actually go back and say, hold on, none of that actually was in line with what we were trying to do.
no,
It's crazy.
no, it wasn't. And it was, yeah, it was a really interesting, because then we could see how he actually operated,
Mm,
because rather than the people who gone through the process and we had no way of
Yeah.
validating them.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, it was a good way to go, yep, this decision making process is valid. It helps make good decisions.
Love it. Well
Hmm.
done. And
Thanks.
you've kind of alluded to what you do, but I thought I'd love to give you an opportunity to really tell us exactly what you do. So if people want to get in contact
Well,
with Ellie, they can.
well, yeah, I help businesses make decisions. I help them really figure out like what is their potential and how can they open up their business to step into that. So from a people and culture perspective, um, unlocking that potential with the people and performance.
Yep.
Um, so if you have a performance issue, if you're struggling with hiring, if you're trying to create a culture that, or you've got a culture that's not working for you, then I help businesses to create one.
Nice.
We look at leadership, we look at um, communication, we look at processes in terms of decision making, creating that psychological safety. That's a big thing, I think, in organizations that are very successful. They allow people to feel, you know, safe in that. Helping individuals then as well. So whether that be the leader or someone who's like, oh, I have to make, I have to be better at this, but yet they've got so much overwhelm and anxiety and emotional stuff that's kind of kicking in.
Yeah.
So I either work directly or I've got courses or I can create bespoke things for clients depending on what they've got going on.
That's awesome. And I think, it seems to be the new era of, you know, people development, culture development,
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. And I think it's
Yeah.
so good. Finally, you know,
Yeah.
10, 15 years ago, we didn't even talk about this stuff.
And I kind of one of my goals was I wanted to help businesses make better people, not just better employees.
I like that.
And I had said this to a few people a couple of years ago, and they're like, businesses don't care about that. And I was like, oh yeah. And I was allowed to be swayed in that. And like, I was like, oh, but that is really important to me because the businesses that I've worked in that have helped me be a better person, not just a better employee. Yes, I'm a better employee because I'm a better person, but they looked at me as a person, not just an employee,
Yeah.
and they invested in that to help me get to where I needed to go, not where I wanted to go, but help to where I needed to be in order to be a well-rounded employee.
Yeah.
And I think if companies are looking at, because it is a knowledge base, right? Because people are being driven by purpose over profits, if you're not thinking about candidate experience, employee experience, looking at the culture that you're creating,
Training and development,
training and
career
development,
opportunities,
all of it,
work-life balance, all that stuff.
exactly, allowing people to really be themselves and show up as themselves in the fullest expression that they can, and making sure that your business and their values align, then those are the businesses that are going to be successful. And then the
Yeah.
businesses that are you're just a number, you're just a bum on a seat, and have no congruence between what they say and how they show up, they're the ones that are going to fall back.
Yeah.
And you can see that massively when you look at companies like Google, like um, oh, what's that delivering happiness thing? Because I study those businesses to help businesses recreate that in their own special way. And it's like those businesses who take the people centric um, and the purpose and have a really strong why and are able to communicate that in terms of behaviors, not just esoteric, fluffy, whatever.
Yeah.
Um, those are the ones that are super successful, and the businesses whose leaders are human centric are the businesses that will last.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And in this last few years, recruiting in this market
Yeah, your IT. So.
only is more and more important to really look after your staff and really build a human-centric approach to everything that you do, to how do you promote yourself, because
Yeah.
it attracts the right people and it keeps the people there, because in this crazy market, you have to.
Yeah. Yeah. And people, yes, the frequency of change, people changing jobs has increased.
For sure.
So but I think one of the ways to slow that down is by making sure that people are tuned in. Like, so um, making sure, so the things that I find important, making sure that every day I show up, those values are being met and expressed will keep me in tune with what's happening. But when there's that misalignment or my values aren't being met, there is that that conflict that happens, and that causes people to move on, because if they feel like they're making a difference, there is a thing called progression theory. So if we don't feel like we're progressing, the human and I were so lazy and we evolve really quickly. If we're not getting that recognition and we're not seeing things move on, then we get itchy and we're like, I want to have this in a place and I want to be able to see how I'm progressing. And if you're not, and maybe people are progressing, but you need to make sure that they see that as well. Because like often
so
people,
important.
I think performance reviews and things like that, people just get really involved in the day to day, and it's like actually taking stock, coming back to that point, focusing in on the goals and showing how someone's moving towards that goal. You will get more engagement and longevity out of an employee than just
Then one performance review every 12 months. I mean, that's just who's going to wait 12 months?
Way too long. And if you're on the wrong track or whatever, and it's different because people are like, well, I chat to them every day, and I was like, it's not the same. The goal of the conversation isn't the same. You're not setting a pathway for someone to get from A to B, and I think that's just from a lack of confidence and knowledge from a leader perspective. To go, right, where can I take these? How do I get the most out of these? How do I create a coaching environment as opposed to a dictating environment? So those are all things that I help businesses create and build into their organizations and their people.
Oh, that's fantastic. I think that's so important these days, more and more than ever before. And companies really have to look at this and do this properly if they really want to succeed. There's just no two ways about it. I see it every day.
And you'll just keep hiring people and they'll leave, and you'll always be at that plateau. And me personally, I want to go to work place so that it's really fun, and that you have a good time and that you enjoy what you do and that you're making a difference. And when I'm working for clients, I look for that too. I want to be helping them achieve those and have those values amplified.
Yeah, I love it. Well done, Ellie. So, Ellie, how do we find you? What's the best way for people to get in touch?
So if you go to yourtalentstrategies.com, they'll be able to find my website and download some stuff.
All that cool stuff.
Send me a message if you want to have a chat.
Awesome. And you're on LinkedIn, obviously.
Yep. Ellie Megraw.
Beautiful. And I'm going to put all the links in the show notes for everyone so you can find Ellie and track her down and drive her crazy. But
ask me lots of questions. And then that's it. Like, if people are like, oh, I kind of maybe, I offer a 1-hour strategy chat if people want to find out, like, where potentially things are going wrong and have some guidance on how to fix those things. So I'm more than welcome to jump in and take advantage of that.
Awesome. Well, Ellie, I really appreciate you coming on the show. It's been absolutely fantastic. I've loved our chat. I've learned so much, and I hope the audience has too.
Yeah, me too.
Is there anything else that you'd like to leave us with before we finish?
Make good choices.
You got to put that on a t-shirt.
Make good choices, and here's how.
I love it.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure. Everyone out there, hope you have a great day. Hope you enjoyed that. We'll see you very, very soon for another episode. If you want to join us on the show and you've got something to share, please do let me know. Just get in touch, and I'd only be too happy to put together a show with you. Bye for now.
Bye.
Thanks again for joining me for another episode of Soul Searching, the Soul Recruitment Podcast. If you'd like to join me as a guest on the show, I would be delighted to collaborate. Feel free to buzz me on 0414 659 800 or email me on darren@soulrecruitment.com.au. I'm always on the lookout for great guests who can share their stories and expertise with my community. But for now, though, have a fantastic day, and I'll see you next time.